Peak Human.
Les humains à leur meilleur.
C'est tu apogeo.
Peak 人間
Peak Human.
Hey again, everyone. It's Brian Sanders, ready for another episode of the Peak Human podcast. I never say my name on these things. I feel like that's a thing all other podcasters do. They have their picture on the podcast artwork and always mention their full name. I think they're better at this stuff than me. Maybe I should be trying to do some PR or something. Nah, it'll work itself out. Today I had the pleasure of talking to celebrity chef, filmmaker, and all-around great guy, Pete Evans. He co-hosts a #1 show in Australia, My Kitchen Rules, which is in its 10th season and is shown in 160 countries. He's written a ton of books and cookbooks. He's created the show The Paleo Way and has a great podcast called Recipes for Life. You may know him from the documentary The Magic Pill, which everyone listening has probably already seen on Netflix. He's an amazing positive force in Australia and the world, and it may not be apparent from our brief talk. We only had an hour, so I'm going to have him on again because there's so much more to get into. I'll get a better recording situation next time. You'll notice the quality wasn't so great due to the recording service we were forced to use. A lot to join this episode though. He brings up some really creepy stuff about the Dietitians Association of Australia colluding to discredit and silence himself and a prominent doctor who advocate for people to lower sugar in their diet. Absurd but true. These are the last few days you can pre-order the Food Lies film on Indiegogo. We really need your help to get this finished. We're not taking any outside funding and have so far used much of our own time, money, and resources. It's really coming out fantastic, and I can't wait to share it with the world. Pre-ordering is the only way to have your own copy and share it with family and friends, and you'll get it a couple months early. It's also the best way to show your support for this podcast and getting this information out there. I really appreciate all the support so far and can't thank this awesome community enough. Click through the link in the show notes on your podcast app, at peak-human.com, at foodlies.org, or search for it on indiegogo.com. Thanks, and please enjoy my talk with Pete Evans. All right, Pete, thanks for coming on the podcast with me. How's Australia this morning?
Mate, it's beautiful. The sun is up. The kids are asleep in bed, and I'm ready to go. Thank you for having me.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for inviting me on your show. I had a great time recording that last week.
It was brilliant, mate. I really appreciate everything that you're doing and your desire for a better planet and sharing your truth. So, thank you so much. It's reciprocated today, so hopefully we can have some good fun.
Yeah, well, we're both on the same mission here, it sounds like. So people in America don't know you as well, but Pete is a celebrity chef in Australia. You had a really successful TV show for many years. And what else are you doing over there?
Yeah, it's really interesting. I mean, I've been a chef now for nearly 30 years as my primary, vocation. And that came about through a necessity just to learn a life skill. So I started an apprenticeship. I wanted to learn how to cook. And over the last 30 years, I've cooked over 1 million meals with these two hands, and lucky enough to open restaurants from a very young age. And for 20 years, I basically locked myself away in kitchens cooking for people. And it's a hard slog, I tell you that. A normal working week would average 80 hours every week for those 20 years, sometimes reaching into the 100-hour work weeks. And it took a toll on my body and took a toll on my mind. But it was a great creative outlet. And then about 15 to 20 years ago, I got offered a job on TV, and I couldn't think of anything I would rather not do than stand in front of a camera. I was a pretty shy kid and even a very shy adult. But I went along, I did the audition, and I got the job. And now it was really interesting. I mean, yesterday I had to work for my television network, which is a free-to-air. It's the largest free-to-air TV network in Australia. And I happened to co-host the #1 show on the #1 network in Australia. So from being the shyest kid and not really thinking there'd be any type of career for me in television cookery, it's bizarre now. Like, we're standing in front of all the advertisers for next year's budget for the TV network, which is, I think there's a pool in Australia of $4 billion. So it's really interesting how life is manifesting itself for me. And over 20 years, I've been doing about 5 or 6 different types of TV shows, all based around food. And I've actually produced 2 series of a TV program called The Paleo Way, which is available on iTunes in the US and different parts of the world. And also last year, I released our documentary called The Magic Pill.
Yeah.
So these films and TV programs, The Paleo Way and also The Magic Pill, are fully self-funded. They're passion projects for me. It's really about sharing information and also, I guess at the heart of it, it's really about my own education and wanting to speak to experts from around the world and understand what is working for these doctors, working for these researchers and specialists, and working for the people that have turned their lives around in a sustainable and long-lasting way. And being able to, I guess, take that information and package it up in a format like the Paleo Way TV series that has the practical applications. So we teach people how to cook these delicious meals that are easy and family-friendly and inspiring, interspersed with these remarkable stories of the farmers, the doctors, the scientists, the people that have reclaimed their health. And also with the Magic Pill, we endeavoured to do the same thing, not so much on the cooking side of things, but we used food as a tool because I wanted to illustrate how powerful just changing what we put into our mouths and what we decide to cook for ourselves can have a hugely profound effect on our health. And I would like to just say that food is hugely important, but it's not the be-all and end-all of great health. I mean, we could eat all the beautiful low-carb, paleo, ketogenic, organic food in the world, but still suffer disease if we don't have the other pillars of health strong, such as movement, such as the air that we breathe, such as the water that we drink, such as the thoughts that we have about ourselves and for others, such as an emotional well-being and spiritual well-being. How do we sleep? Are we getting vitamin D from the sun? Are we reconnecting with nature? Are we avoiding EMFs and other modern-day pollutants for our bodies and our minds and our souls? So that's where I'm heading next, actually, is to talk about those things and bring that information into my next work, which will be another documentary, because I feel like we've ticked off the food side of things with the Magic Pill and the Paleo Way, and they're the seeds that I wanted to plant, that it's up for people. If they want to water them, that's up to them. So the next part is emotional well-being and what it means to be human, and that's what I love talking about, and that really interests me.
That's so cool. And I want to talk about that later. Yeah, I'm glad that you are free to talk about that now and you're not trying to keep it a secret project.
No.
What you're trying to do next. But I feel like you just did the entire recap of everything right there, right here. So maybe we could go back and dive in a little more into each piece. I mean, I heard that you put out Paleo Way and I started watching some of the episodes and it was so amazing, but it wasn't getting the traction it needed. So you got it into the format of a documentary. Is that what happened?
Yeah. If at first you don't succeed, try again. Isn't that the motto? So, I thought I was on to something great here. I created a TV series with a friend of mine called Rob Tate, who I work with on a PBS show. So in Australia, I work on a show called My Kitchen Rules, which is a reality-based cooking competition. And that takes up about 5 to 6 months my year. We film about 50 episodes per year, and we're currently filming our 10th season. And that's shown, I think, around 160 countries around the world. So a lot of people know me for that. I wear a suit and I judge people's cooking, which is very far removed from my normal day-to-day life and what I normally do. But it's a wonderful concept, and I have a lot of joy and fun out of it. And it also helps to give me some financial freedom to be able to create the projects that I want to do. So when I created the Paleo Way series, I thought it was a no-brainer. Let's make a TV series with beautiful recipes, inspirational stories, and with paleo as its backbone. So I went off and created it without having a network to fund it. I just went, well, I have a desire to do this. I have a passion to do this. I have the funding to do this. I mean, what am I going to spend my money on? I want to spend it on something that actually means something to me and hopefully can improve the health of others. So off we went. And I was like, okay, each episode should feature about 3 to 5 recipes, and each episode should feature a theme, whether it's hunting, whether it's fishing, whether it's or sustainable seafood, whether it's talking about organics, whether it's talking about autoimmune, whether it's talking about gut health, whether it's talking about fermenting. So you get the drift. We created 16 episodes, 16 24-minute episodes, each with a different theme. And we shot that over about a 2-year period. And it was pretty intense filming too, because I wanted to do it on a budget. And we actually traveled the world. We shot in America, we shot in the United Kingdom. We shot in Australia, which was a lot of fun. And basically, I took the role of executive producer where I booked the flights, I booked the camera team, I booked the sound recorders, I booked the director. I booked the talent or the guests that I had. I created the recipes, and and it was a pretty full-on experience. You know, usually there's a team of people that do this. And I was like, oh, I'll just do it. And we put it together, and brilliant director Rob Tate did the editing, and he has a great way of telling a story. So at the end of that, I had this 8-episode series, and I managed to sell it to a distribution company called Endemol, which is one of the largest distribution companies in the world. And I was like, here we go. We're going to get the Paleo Way out to a global audience and redefine the cooking genre of television, you know, or create a new genre instead of just reality-based TV shows, which someone gets eliminated and someone wins a prize. And also the basic sort of cooking shows where it's a chop and cook type thing. I wanted to add, you know, some depth that I thought was really missing in a genre of cooking that just made total perfect sense to me, was, you know, cooking for health. So off it went. And the first month went, and I contacted them. I said, so where's the series being aired? And they're like, we haven't found anywhere yet. And I'm like, okay. The second month came around, and I'm like, have you got any, where's it going, you know? Surely you must be able to sell it to the 160 countries that currently buy My Kitchen Rules, which is the reality show I'm doing. They said, no, we don't have anyone yet. Third month came around, and they go, oh, we've sold it into, I think it was Poland or something. They've had to dub it or subtitle it. I'm like, okay, well, that's a start. Next month came around, like, okay, surely you must have a bite in America or Canada or the UK or Australia. And it was no. And that just kept going. Like for a year, I think we got 2 different countries or 3 different countries that were non-English speaking. And I was dumbfounded. And it wasn't because what surprised me about it was that it was actually a quality production. It wasn't slapdash. It was beautifully shot. Like if you watched, as you've seen it, high production values, beautiful cooking, beautiful stories. So it really was challenging because I'd sold it to this company and I'd already spent that money to pay back what I'd already spent, and also started filming the second series because I was like, oh, okay, well, I was so proud of the first series. We're filming the second series. And these types of shows cost a few $100,000 to put together, minimum. And, hey, this is really interesting. I've got a company that has my program that can help change millions of people's lives, and we haven't got any traction for it. So it was a really huge lesson for me, and I had huge expectations and they weren't being met, and it really, really troubled me. So we created the second season, and this time I was like, okay, I'm going to get this out there in a way that people can see it. So I put it out onto iTunes. Now, the issue with that is I didn't get paid anything, obviously. So here's another couple of $100,000 that I've invested into something with no guarantee of return. And I was like, okay, well, it's a gift to humanity. How do we get it out there? And hopefully try to get a return so I don't go broke, I don't go bankrupt. So got it out to there onto iTunes and different streaming platforms. And it's a very slow trickle of return, but that's okay. At least people are actually watching it. So through that process, I had all this beautiful material, and I was like, damn, I still want to get this material out there to a large audience. And I was looking at what seemed to be generating in the interest out there. It seemed to be the documentary food space. Films like Joe Cross's Fat, Sick and Nearly Dead, What the Health had just been released on Netflix and was creating quite a viral storm for right and wrong reasons, depending on which way you look at it. And shows such as Fed Up, Cowspiracy, these type of quite intense button-pushing documentaries. I was like, okay, well, there's definitely a thirst or hunger for these types of films. So once again, I contacted my dear friend Rob, and I said, hey, from all of these interviews that we've got, do you think it's possible for us to be able to package this into a documentary? And he said, let me think about it. And he came back and said, well, for a documentary to work, we need to have stories of people going on the journey. I said, okay, well, we have anecdotal stories of people, but I guess we're going to have to follow people from start to finish. And he said, And again, it was like, it's going to cost you, Pete. I'm like, uh-huh.
Mm-hmm.
How do we do it on a budget? And he goes, we're going to have to film it in America because that's where I'm based, and I'll do it with my camera and I'll edit it, and you give me 6 months to a year, and we'll be able to create something that I think will be worthy of what you're wanting to say. And it was amazing. So once we said, yep, yeah, and again, it was a few hundred thousands of dollars.
Mm-hmm.
But once we pressed, let's do it, all these amazing synchronicities popped up for us. So in my radar, I had the Hope for Health, which is a wonderful non-for-profit charity organisation in Australia that is set up to help the Indigenous of Australia, the Australian Aboriginals. And basically it's a 2-week retreat set up by a husband and wife. The wife is a doctor and the husband has lived his life in far north Northern Territory with the Indigenous, and his father has written a wonderful book called Why Warriors Die, which I recommend for everyone to read. It's about how Indigenous cultures have the impact of, I guess, colonization from outward entities and the devastating effect that has on Indigenous peoples around the world, especially the Australian Aboriginals. So here we had these two people, this husband and wife, that had set up this 2-week retreat, basically setting the platform for the Indigenous to go back to how they once ate prior to the white people's food, or Western people's food, called Hope for Health, and which is basically a paleo template. And they were running the retreat, and they said, and I saw it, I said, oh, would you mind if we came and filmed this? Because I felt like, if there's one story to be told, that's it. That's the most powerful story I believe there is, because that is a purely, it just resonated with me so much because of the work with Weston A. Price, who I'm a huge fan of, and his discovery and his work on Indigenous populations around the world. And here we had this wonderful opportunity to film with the Indigenous that have type 2 diabetes, that are overweight, that have on multiple medications. And it's a return to their native diet or natural diet, which is what paleo or hunter-gathering and Weston A. Price and primal and ancestral is all about, which was what I wanted the film to portray, because we know it works. We know it works. So here's a great opportunity. So I contacted Rob. I said, hey, can you come to Australia for a couple of weeks and film this retreat? He goes, I'd love to. So he spent 2 weeks the whole entire time with the Hope for Health organisation, and documented some amazing, amazing stuff that is irrefutable. People getting off their type 2 diabetes medication in 2 weeks' time, within 2 weeks, changing their blood.
It was so amazing.
Yeah,
it was so amazing to see it. I don't get, there's so much criticism of the movie in the mainstream dietitian world and that kind of thing, when I don't get how you can argue with it and you could see it unfold.
Yeah, it's common sense, and I thank Hope for Health so much for the opportunity to film, and the participants, and also for Rob for coming to Australia and living in that heat for 2 weeks as a American native himself. He's or New York native, I should say. He put himself through that and captured some beautiful, beautiful footage and stories that I believe is the most powerful part of the film. And as I said, it's undeniable. It's common sense. It's irrefutable. It's non-debatable. Yeah. And we could have made a whole film on that, and the Indigenous societies around the world all doing that. But the next thing that popped into our radar was the trial by our friend Professor Timothy Noakes in South Africa, and that was unfolding at the same time. And I asked him if it was okay to have Rob come over to South Africa and film his trial. And at this point in time, I was like, well, these opportunities are coming. It's going to cost some money to do this, but it just felt like these opportunities were too good to pass up, because here we have a man that is being persecuted for sharing the truth, and the truth that he's sharing can help the whole planet. And he's being persecuted by a dietary organization that is fundamentally backed by multinational food corporations. So what a wonderful story. This is reality. This is the truth. This is the matrix of what is happening in our world at the moment. And we had no idea what was going to happen with the trial. So we followed it through from start to finish, and all charges were dropped. He won the trial, and it took him 2 years to clear his name, which has now set a precedent around the world for doctors and professionals to be able to prescribe and promote a low carbohydrate, healthy fat approach, which is basically paleo in its entirety. And we also just had the same thing happen in Australia with a very dear friend of mine called Dr. Gary Fettke, who basically was silenced by our medical association and our dietary association because he was prescribing a low carbohydrate diet to his patients. And he's an orthopedic surgeon who cuts off people's limbs at the very late stages of type 2 diabetes. And he was actually saying to his patients, hey, listen, if you reduce your sugar, that would be a really good step for you, for your health. And he was brought up on charges and basically silenced by the medical association, saying you cannot tell patients to reduce their sugar intake. And he's like, excuse me?
This seems like an alternate reality. This doesn't even make sense.
Yeah. So unfortunately we didn't get to feature that, but we're doing something in Australia for our TV network on that story right now, which is great. So we had Tim Noakes trial, we had the Indigenous retreat, and then Rob had his family that wanted to partake. His cousin and their daughter, I think is the correct family ties there, who's on the autism spectrum. So we covered young Abigail on basically a 10-week GAPS or low carb, healthy fat approach, non-inflammatory. And it was remarkable to see the changes in her over 10 weeks. So here we have Indigenous, we have the professor, we have a young girl with autism. Then we also had a nurse that has type 2 diabetes that we followed, who got off all her medication in a few months, lost a hell of a lot of weight. Then we also had another friend of Rob's who was a Las Vegas singer, who was on a host of medications, who changed her life in a very short period of time just by changing her food. And we also went and featured some more interviews with some amazing people like Dr. Rangan Chatterjee from BBC, from the UK, who has a TV show called Doctor in the House on the BBC, which is promotes a low carb, healthy fat or ketogenic approach. And he himself is on a paleo diet. We got Nina Teschaltz, who wrote The Big Fat Surprise. We had Nora Gagardis, who was the instigator for myself and my wife on our health journey, who wrote Primal Body, Primal Mind. We got to film with Joel Salatin to talk about the environmental impacts of holistic farming. We got to feature Lee Eyre Keith, who wrote The Vegetarian Myth, to talk about, not to counteract the vegan movement or the vegetarian movement, but just to add her own truth and to talk about it in a way that, again, is irrefutable when it comes to the health of the planet and how to raise food for a planet in the most sustainable way and for the most health-giving way to human beings as well. So if you had to see the first edit of it, Rob went down a path to actually try to make it a little bit more controversial and polarizing and attacking certain ways of eating. And I said to Rob, mate, this is not what I want to do. This is not my story. This is not my truth. My intention for this film is to promote the truth and not throw anyone or any ideology or philosophy or belief system under the bus, except for the multinational food industry. So I said, let's just point that out as to what that is, and not make a whole film about it. But if there's anything that we can throw any dirt to, it should be that, because it is a corrupt industry in the way that it can intimidate and also manufacture the results that it needs through scientific studies and bully people that are trying to share the truth. So I thought that's something that we definitely can include in a way that it doesn't take over the whole film, because I'm not into watching films that are all about conspiracies and all that sort of stuff. Yeah. I just want to share the truth. So I feel like we got a really good balance personally for what I wanted to share. And I'm very proud of the work that Rob has done with the editing, and proud of being able to film with the Indigenous community, Tim Noakes' trial, and for these amazing families that led us into their lives to document them, and all the experts that we had access to film with. And the film actually now is on Netflix. I released it through iTunes originally, and my intention was always to get it onto Netflix, because at the moment it's the number one form of entertainment or mass media viewing in that genre of film and TV. So I'm very grateful for my distribution company called Gravitas to push for Netflix to get it out there. And they released it in a few territories to start with, and it went viral. And now it's released globally in every single territory that they have, except for, I think it's Korea or China and Syria, I think, are the only two.
Wow.
But it's in every language. It's subtitled now, so everyone can see it. And it's so funny because I get the hashtag Magic Pill that I follow on Instagram, and it pops up on my Instagram feed, and I see nowadays that I think 90% of the posts that come through are in different languages. So if it's got the translation button on Instagram, I press translate for me, so I can see what people are saying. But it's done what I intended to do. It's actually got it out there. And the funny thing now is I have the Paleo Way coming to Netflix in the next year. So they've agreed to put that onto their platform. So it's funny how things work without the denial or without the path for Paleo Way making it onto the screens that I thought it would, created a pathway for me to either get pissed off and retreat or find a solution for my intention, which helped create the Magic Pill, which helped open the doors now to actually get the Paleo Way into, and it's all to do with timing, and it was all a test and a challenge for me and how I would react to that frustration. And now my next film is we're having a chat to people, and hopefully my intention now is to get funding for the next one, so I don't have to put my hand in my pocket this time. But
hard. I'm trying to figure that out too, but yeah.
But we'll see what comes from that. I have no expectations, but it would be nice to not have to pay for it.
Yeah, well, now you have some success, and I'm so glad that path happened where you found a home for it and a format, and sometimes that documentary format is pretty powerful. So I think that's great that you found that, and I think it's a little weird though that it didn't catch on as a series because series are so popular on TV and Netflix. But I think if sometimes you need that little bit of controversial angle, even though you toned it down, to make that point.
It's hilarious too. Like when the film came out here in Australia, the Australian Medical Association was going on to free-to-air networks like the current affairs shows and saying it's a dangerous film and we want it pulled from Netflix. This is the president of the Australian Medical Association, who has now been replaced. But actually, seriously, going on to breakfast TV and current affairs, late night, free-to-air television, and basically screaming for the Magic Pill, my documentary, to not be shown on Netflix. So I crafted a response to that just through my social media, which got into the media, basically saying, why does the president of the Australian Medical Association have concern over a film that is promoting the consumption of well-sourced meat and seafood and vegetables when it seems to be anecdotally helping people achieve great health, yet at the same time, the president of the Australian Medical Association is not calling for any ban on junk food advertising on mainstream television.
For kids.
I would really like him to answer that question as to why my film is causing him so much distress, and if he could please present the evidence that eating well-sourced meat and seafood and fruit and vegetables is hazardous to any human's health, if he could present the evidence for that. A few months later, he was out of a job, which was interesting, but there was no response from him or his team as to can meat and vegetables be hazardous for human health.
It's insane. I know the dietitians associations in different countries, it's going directly against their business and their livelihood and their beliefs. So what else do you think is going on, especially with this guy?
Well, I think it's the association. I mean, it's interesting. When the Australian Medical Association started 40 years ago, they had a 97% enrolment from doctors around the country. And today, in 2018, they have, I think it's 25% enrolment or affiliation from doctors around the country. So if you're looking at where that is heading as a union or an organisation, I would dare say in 10 to 15 years it will no longer exist. So they are holding on to something. And interestingly enough, so the doctor that I mentioned before, Dr. Gary Fetke, who was silenced over here, he's been, himself and myself and others have been campaigning very strongly through our own forms of media and social media to have the dietary guidelines changed, and especially to have the Dietitians Association of Australia sever ties with multinational food organisations and corporations such as Nestle and Unilever that fund them. And just 2 weeks ago, they finally announced that they were severing all ties with multinational food corporations. And the timing is perfect. I think it's one of the first dietary organizations in the world to do that. So this will have a cascading effect, because what happened this year was the Dietitians Association, Dr. Gary Fettke, managed to get some files, internal dialogue from them, plus also multinational food corporations colluding to having an interest in, I need to choose my words carefully here, but they were colluding to basically have Dr. Gary Fettke, myself, and a few others in the low-carb paleo movement as targets for PR companies and for them to work against, to basically shut our voices down in the media. So
Wow.
we've got those documents, and we can see, and also who they use as spokespeople in their own organizations to promote their message, which is more grains, which is everything in moderation, which is the whole gamut
failed
of
the failed way of doing
yeah,
that.
which is based in lies. So it's interesting that they've come out now and said we're actually severing ties. Like, they would not do that unless they feared class action lawsuits and more media backlash from prominent people in society. So, and we've been giving it to them for the last few years, like pretty hard. And it's great that they're actually happy to change their tune. How far are they happy to change their tune? I see it now that they've opened the door, that they're concerned, and now our mission is to change the dietary guidelines, which should be the next thing.
Hopefully you will have an easier time than us in America. And actually, I've been in contact with Gary Fettke for a while now, and I think he wants to wait for us to do a podcast so he has some news stuff that he's working on. But it's great to hear that's in the works.
And Nina Schultz is a wonderful woman who, if it's going to get changed in the United States, her and her nutrition coalition, I think is the correct terminology that they've got, but her and her team are the ones to do it, because she definitely is a very powerful person, very persistent and tenacious, and very intelligent as well. So and it's her mission. It's her mission to do this, and I look forward to seeing the next 5 to 10 years and seeing how all of this starts to change, and we can create a better society, because the only way we can create a better society is through the correct information and education. And the education starts from a scholastic level, especially because I have so many friends and teachers that work in the education system that have to teach that children need to eat 6 to 8 serves of grains per day, and however many serves of dairy, and how many serves of fruits and vegetables and meat should be sort of, if you look at the World Health Organizations, where they're going, it's like they want to eliminate meat from the diet for people. It is a worrying message that they are promoting and that our dietitians are promoting at the moment. So, but there's good times ahead. I'm optimistic.
I think so. I love the work she's doing, and I hope we're not making the same film here. Obviously I know what you made now, but I had Nina Teicholz, I went to Joel Salatin's farm, I got Professor Tim Noakes, but it's so great when it popped onto my radar. I'm halfway into making this, and I saw the magic pill and loved it, and so glad that there's more information getting out there.
And the more the low carb, healthy fat, or ancestral paleo ketogenic movement get out there, even the carnivore at the moment with Sean Baker, and I just interviewed Michaela Peterson last week, and I've got Sean in a couple of weeks. Even that, just to help balance out the terrible information that's out there at the moment. So your film, others, please make these films. Let's get this information out there in any way, shape or form. I've been speaking with Diana, who's making the film. I think it's Kale versus Cow.
Right. Diana Roger.
Yeah, and she's, I think, turning it into a series at the moment. But again, more and more of this that we can get out there through our combined efforts and through our combined promotion of this, the more it'll sink in, because there's the old saying, sometimes you need to hear it a few times. You need to get hit over the head a few times for it to sink in. So,
definitely.
People are warming up to it. My film was a great little introduction, and yours might be the hammer that drives that nail into our consciousness in a greater way. So, and that's how I see it.
Yeah, hopefully. And I'm really trying to go from a scientific approach too and say, let's look at all sides of this, right? Let's look at history, evolution. Let's look at biochemistry. Let's look at randomized controlled trials, clinical evidence. everything you can possibly think of to make a case for why this is very common sense and easy to figure out, and there should be no controversy around it. So,
No. Well, they won't one
and
day.
well, one day, yeah, I believe we'll get back to simple truths like eating real food someday. And I like also, yeah, like you mentioned, Michaela and Sean Baker, I've talked to both of them, and I love their message too. Well, one is just fighting. We need the opposite. We need equal and opposite sides to combat sort of vegan propaganda. I have no problem with people eating a vegan diet. They just need to keep it to themselves, though. The problem is when they come out against saying, making up lies, spreading misinformation. So that's one good aspect of Sean Baker. And also just to show that it's not bad, right? We need someone to say, all I've eaten is meat in 2 years and I'm in perfect health. So I'm not saying everyone should do it at all, but at least to prove meat is not some boogeyman like they make it out to be. The problem is what you're eating the meat with.
Well, it's really interesting you say that. I mean, we could all agree on the better treatment of animals. That's something that vegans, vegetarians, and all of us, I think every single person in the world could agree on and strive towards. And we all are living on this planet, so we all need to strive towards a more sustainable future. And we all have that in common. We actually have more in common than we don't, when we really boil it down. But, I cooked a beautiful dinner last night for my children. It was a perfect piece of steak and vegetables. It had roasted pumpkin, it had some broccoli on there, it had beautiful grass-fed, grass-finished steak and a nice little sauce and some sauerkraut on the plate. And there's nothing else I would rather feed my kids. And they know it. They love eating steak. They love eating roast pumpkin. It's a no-brainer. It really is a no-brainer. And I go back to the medical association. How can what I just fed my children last night and myself for dinner, meat and vegetables, be problematic to their health? Prove it. I dare you. I dare you. I'll bet you $1 million that you'll never be able to create a proper trial that would disprove this fact for a human being. Unless, of course, if someone was allergic to certain things, such as Michaela or anybody that can't tolerate red meat through the tick.
Yeah, well, that's very rare. But so I also heard you talking about, I started listening to some podcasts that you were on to get more familiar with you. And it's been a treat. You're such a philosophical, kind soul.
Oh, thank you, brother.
I found. I just really love your take on all of this and all of your wisdom. And I mean, hopefully we can get into a little bit of that stuff later. But you were talking about how getting rid of all the blandest foods, right? As a chef, why would I want just the pasta and these plain ingredients that have no taste and no nutrition? Why would I need these in my diet or as a chef in my arsenal when I could be eating the most delicious and nutrient-dense foods possible?
So it was interesting. A few years ago, I did some talks around the country and in New Zealand, and I invited Nora Gagaudis out to join me. And she's a great speaker. She's got a super brain. She'd be a great one for your podcast if you haven't had her on before.
Primal Body, Primal
Mind.
Yeah.
Super intelligent. Like a brain I admire and I'm jealous of how her mind works, And she's a dear friend to my wife and myself. And it was funny. I read her book. My wife was reading her book, and she said to me, "Pete, you might want to read this." And I was like, "Okay." And as soon as I read it, I was like, "Okay, wow, truth. I'm going to adopt this." And I adopted it. That was 8 years ago. And as soon as I finished the book, and as soon as I got the results that manifested from it and came out of eating a paleo approach, I just emailed her. I said, "I want to meet you. I want to work with you. This information needs to be spread far and wide, and I believe I can do that here in Australia. Please help me share your message, or please let me help share your message." And I thought it was a perfect relationship. You got the chef and you got the brains behind it with Nora. So we did a speaking tour over a couple of years, 2 years. And the second year, I really went into the food side, the practical side of things, and I had different guests up on stage. And part of my presentation that came to me was just like that philosophy from a chef's point of view. And I tried to bring everything back to being a cook when I deliver my message up on stage as a chef, because that's my expertise. Because people always give me a hard time saying, "How can a chef talk about nutrition?" And I'm like, how can a chef not talk about nutrition? It's fucking food, right? That's what I'm trained to do. If there's anybody that can talk about food, it's a chef. And if any chef is not talking about the impact of food on the body, then I think they're missing part of their job title. You know, it really is. You know, my definition of a chef is to cook the most delicious, nutritious food for the public, for the paying public. It's basically my responsibility as a human being to provide wellness for any other person. You know, that's my philosophy now. And it took me a while to find that. My initial thought was just to cook delicious food. And now it's okay, well, how do I share delicious, nutritious food? Because why would I want to be hurting somebody with recipes that can be harmful? And we know those types of recipes. And but talking about the bland foods, it got me thinking about, you know, what are these foods that we've eliminated on a paleo approach? Okay, they're grains. So let's think about grains for a minute. It's wheat, it's rice, it's barley, all the different types of grains that are out there. And I thought about it from a flavor point of view. And I was like, geez, imagine, you know, you go to a farm and you pluck a carrot out of the ground and eat it. You can pick a berry off the bush and eat it. You can grab something off a tree and eat it. You can grab herbs out of the garden and eat it. If you're at the beach, you can find an oyster, take it off the shell and crack it open and eat it. If you're fishing, you can catch a fish and fillet it on the boat and slice it and have sashimi. If you're starving and you watch The Revenant and you watch Leonardo DiCaprio eat that liver or heart from the beast that's killed, you know, that to me is food, you know, and all of that has flavor, right? And, you know, maybe the raw liver can be, or the raw meat straight off a kill can be challenging for people. But I tell you what, if you've never eaten sashimi or carpaccio or beef tartare, you know, all of these things can be created in a way that's absolutely delicious, right? And it got me thinking about a rice field and a wheat field. And I thought, who in their right mind would ever look at a wheat field or a rice field and go, geez, that looks delicious? You know, who would be walking through there, plucking that stuff off and chewing on it, going, that just tastes really good and that feels good for my body, as opposed to the other preferences or other ingredients that I just mentioned. And to me, that's common sense. And to me, one has all of those ones that I talked about have nutrition, whereas the other ones seem to be lacking and can cause harm for us. So, and then I got thinking, okay, well, if they don't have any flavor, let's think about how the Western diet is at the moment in 2018 or 2017 or 2016. We're eating 70% of our diet is refined carbohydrates or high in carbohydrates. And usually we've got a piece of toast or cereal or muesli or granola for breakfast. Mid-morning tea, we're eating a muffin or a croissant or muesli bar or something to keep us going, or coffee to keep us going. Lunch comes around and it's a wrap, a sandwich, it's a roll, it's sushi these days. Mid-afternoon comes and people are slumping down. They're reaching for chocolate or candy or something to keep them going, alcohol or another coffee. Dinner time comes, and once upon a time that used to be meat and 3 veg. And these days it's pasta, it's rice, it's pizza, it's junk food or whatever it is. And it got me thinking about, well, where's the meat and the vegetables in a standard Australian or Western style diet? It's virtually non-existent. So it got me thinking, why are we filling our plate with pasta? Because if I cooked pasta for somebody as a chef with no sauce or no topping, people will go, geez, Pete, you're a pretty average chef, you know, what are you doing? And if I cooked a bowl of rice for somebody, they'd think, what the fuck are you doing, Pete? You know, where's the flavor? Where's something? But my question back to those people is, why are you eating this every single freaking day? Even if I cooked you a loaf of bread and put it in front of you, you would get very bored of eating that if you didn't put anything on top of it very, very quickly. So why are we filling our plates as a society with these foods that have no flavor, are causing us harm nutritionally because of the quantities that we're eating it in, and taste like shit? Like, seriously, well, actually don't even taste like shit. They don't even have any flavor. And so it comes back to we're addicted to these products. We know that scientifically, what that does to our brain, chemical hormones when we chew on these things and ingest them. But number two is, I believe we've created the most blandest palates that are addicted to bland foods and sweet foods from a very young age. We've trained ourselves habitually to favor these foods. And the argument could be made about pasta that, oh, it's the texture, you know, nothing can beat that. I'm like, yeah, but if it was just texture, you'd be eating pasta I could give you pasta with no sauce every day of the week. you'd have to be excited by that. So it's not that. It's actually what you're putting with it that has the flavor. You can't just say that the texture is your driving force for how you eat. It's an important factor for sure. But if that's your priority, the texture or the mouthfeel, when it comes to how you feed yourself, then you may need to change your priorities as to how things are a priority for you. You know, for me, it's health and nutrition first and foremost. Well, actually, it's deliciousness first and foremost. And like the dinner
comes hand in hand.
Yeah, the dinner I cooked last night was delicious. The lunch that I'm about to eat today is going to be delicious, you know, and it's going to be nutritious. And the rest will take care of itself. The texture and the mouthfeel and the aroma and the preparation and all of that. So
yeah, well, it's the fake flavors. I just read a book called The Dorito Effect that was recommended by my last guest, Marty Kendall, who's an Australian guy. Really awesome guy.
The bliss point.
Yeah, and the problem is we're taking non-nutritious foods that are devoid of anything, and then we just add back in fake flavor, right? The Dorito is like the example. And so now we're tricking ourselves. So now we're overeating the delicious thing, but there's no nutrition in it. And so humans are wired to know what to eat and eat a good variety of fish and meat and vegetables and stuff like that because it's delicious. And that's what we're meant to eat, right? And so like you're saying, if you're getting the whole real foods, they're inherently delicious and you don't need to do much to it other than prepare it in a correct way.
And I do want to say that the reason that pasta and rice is so prevalent as well is because it's cheap. Yeah. And cereals and breads, especially in restaurants, it's a way to keep the food costs down. And because if you, in a restaurant, serve a bowl of pasta, for instance, you know, the food costs, you just adding some sauce to that. So the food cost percentage, you know, and being a restaurateur and a chef all my life, you know, they're the dishes that you make your wages, your rent, your overheads.
Yeah.
That's your profit margin. Because if you want to put on a steak that's organic or a pig that's been pasture raised beautifully, that's lived out in the open, and serve that with organic vegetables, all of a sudden you're playing in a different realm than every other restaurant that you're competing against. And we live in a society that is very budget conscious. So this is why that most restaurants do not feature grass-fed, grass-finished, organic animals as their wild-caught, sustainable seafood and organic vegetables as their primary food choices on their menus. Because, number one, there's just not a huge market for it that is willing to pay for that experience. When right next door, people can get something equally as delicious, less nutritious, but they can afford it. There's a dilemma there, but what I am saying, though, is if we took the restaurant out of the equation and we just cooked at home, then if you were to cook these foods at home, you can actually save money. You can actually do it cheaper than a standard Western diet by being very clever with how you shop and the ingredients that you use. And you might have to use more ground meat or minced meat. You might have to include offal into your diet. You may have to have a few more soups or secondary cuts like tail or cheek or ribs into your diet than you're used to. But the payoff and the benefits as far as financially goes and health-wise goes in the future will bring back so many more dividends. So again, it comes down to a choice, and are you willing to do the work now and change your priorities? Or, and this is an interesting one because most people that adopt a paleo or ketogenic or low carb or ancestral primal approach generally have come to it through ill health, right? And my goal and intention is to get it to be a part of everyday life so it's prevention instead of a solution for sickness. And that's my goal at the moment, is how do we get it to be common sense, a normal way of life, so that we don't have to adjust the course of our destiny when we're faced with the very real prospect of an early death or painful experience through sickness. Because why do we have to go through those challenges or experiences to then find great health? I know, I had to go through that, and so many people have had to go through that as well. But could you imagine a generation growing up where they were just thriving? Could you imagine a generation where they have optimal health, the children? Imagine what they're going to bring to the world on a ethical, sustainable, moralistic model and philosophy when their brains and bodies are operating from an optimal level, I mean, that's what is exciting for me, and that's the future that I envisage and something I would like to work towards and currently work towards, because that's where true change and true global harmony and community will prosper, when people have great health and great mental faculties, and they're not dealing with pain and scarcity.
I so agree, and I'm trying to do that here as well. And this is just the beginning for me. And I'm so glad that, yeah, you're on this mission. I heard you talking about it before too, is in the schools. Like, what if we could teach people how to eat and what proper nutrition is from a young age? And yeah, is there a program that could be implemented? Because I was just thinking of that on the drive over here. It's just, that would be so amazing if this was just common knowledge and you could eat like this for life and learn how to cook. And yes, it's definitely not expensive. I can eat for $6-7 a day. Here in LA is an expensive city, just eating good, nutritious food. So,
well, the way that's going to happen is through the changing of the guidelines. It can never happen without that, because they're installed in Australia anyway, into our education system. So they have to teach the guidelines, which is, it's a bit like religion. Once you are taught that, it's in your psyche. You're sort of brainwashed into those ideologies, and whether it's your parents' belief systems about how life works, or religious dogma, or dietary dogma. These things are taught in our schools, or a lot of our schools. So the system needs to change, and for that to happen, we need to change the guidelines. And we saw the first step of that with the Dietary Association here in Australia severing ties with multinational food corporations. So that's a step in the right direction. Now we need to apply pressure. We need to do it. We need to do it in a very beneficial way for it to happen. So it needs to be scientific. It needs to be from a place of love, and it needs to be in a way that we need to demonstrate and illustrate that this fucking matters. It matters in a way that the future of the planet depends on it. The future of the coming generations' health depends on it. It's, again, I'll use the words, irrefutable. It's undeniable that if this isn't one of the biggest things that we should be getting behind, then I don't know what is.
Well, the problem is, so you and I know that because we've done it. Most of the people listening are on board with this because they can see it. But other people who haven't actually tried it actually have the willpower or sacrifice to cook their own meals instead of just pulling into a drive-through. They don't understand it. And if nutrition research is so hard to do, it's so hard to prove exactly what went on. Like, I could eat a good diet my whole life and not get Alzheimer's, and people would just think, okay, well, that guy just didn't get Alzheimer's. But what if I prevented that Alzheimer's from happening? We would never know that. How do we ever know? So that's the problem. How do we?
I think there's some. I always have the belief that there's really intelligent people out there in the world doing some really powerful stuff that is from the right place. For a better community, for a better planet, for better health for its individuals, for the better health of the animals, for everything. And we know that that's happening. So we need to support those people and get that message out. And through podcasts like this and others, that message is spreading. And it's interesting, I've got a book coming out next year, a children's book, and I created this idea. And I'll share with you the story, because it's a story that I shared with my children, and it's where the idea of this story came from. Because one day I was driving home with my two daughters. It was probably 6 years ago, actually, when they were 6 and 7 years of age. And one of them had just been to a birthday party. And in Australia, we have this fucking horrible tradition of giving children candy bags or lolly bags when they leave a party.
Oh, for sure.
And they've already been eating it at the party, birthday cake and the lot. And then it's like giving somebody a bag of cocaine when they leave your house party. It's like, hey, thanks for coming and partying with me now. Here's a bag. Go have some fun by yourself till 2 a.m. or whatever, And so they do this with children. They give them bags of lollies or bags of candy. We call it lollies in Australia. So when you pick up your child from a party, they've got this bag of sugar that's got all these additives in it, all these food colorings. We know what happens. And it's part of our culture. And it's bizarre. It's so fucking bizarre. But, how do you educate your children about it? Because they're not given that at home. But they're seeing all these other kids give it. And I said to the kids, oh, that's interesting that you got the bag of lollies again. And I said, I wanted to give them a story. So I said, they love animals. And I said to both my daughters in the back of the car, I said, imagine that you both had a bunny rabbit each and that you loved and cared for that bunny rabbit. And it was your responsibility to raise that bunny. Now you do, for that bunny to thrive and to have great health and to be not in pain and not sick, that you had to feed your bunny a simple diet, fresh water, and also whatever bunnies thrive on, whether it be grass and vegetables, for instance, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, what would you feed your bunny? They said, well, we'd feed it the carrots and the vegetables and the lettuce or whatever it needs and the water. I said, okay, well, what if one of your friends had a bunny and they were feeding it candy or lollies and junk food, and that bunny was getting fatter and sicker, but all your friends were feeding their bunnies that? I said, would you ever feed your bunnies what your friends were feeding them if you knew that your bunny could get sick, it mightn't live as long, it might be in pain? And they said, no, we wouldn't. We'd just feed it the grass, the vegetables, and the water because we're in charge. It's our responsibility and we love our bunny. We want it to be healthy. And I said to them, once they made that connection, I said, you are my bunnies. I said, you are my bunnies, girls. I said, other parents will be feeding their children food that doesn't bring them health, may make them sick, and may cause them to be in pain. I said, as your father, at this particular point in time while you're in my care, I choose to feed you the food that I know will bring you great health and not cause addictions or habits to junk food. I said, but that's all very well and good for me to treat you like your bunnies. But the true thing is when you start to treat yourselves as your own bunnies, that's the goal, or that's the true realization. And I said to them, you can choose to eat those lollies if you want to, or the candy that's in the bag. I said, I'm not going to stop you because you're starting to get to that age now at 6 and 7 where you can start to make your own decisions. And maybe you need to eat it to see how you feel once you've eaten that whole bag. And I left it at that. And it's really interesting because the girl's mum owns a chocolate shop or candy shop too. So they're growing up in this, we're separated, we're growing up. The kids are growing up in this great duality of things. But it's interesting. My girls now, they've been eating paleo or low carb pretty much for the last 7 to 8 years since we've adopted it. And they are thriving physically, emotionally, mentally. One's my school captain at a junior school. The other is a straight A student. Physically active, socially amazing with their friends, and they eat this way each and every day. And it's great because they go to their friends' houses and parties and they'll have pizza there and they'll join in the festivities, because they don't want to feel left out. But they're aware of what happens once they eat those foods in those situations. But the interesting fact is 99% of their food is meat and vegetables or seafood and vegetables or eggs and vegetables and fruit. That's the majority. Whereas maybe 1% of their diet when they're at their friends' houses or parties is the standard Western diet. And they can deal with that. And they get to make their own decisions and they get to see how they feel from being on a great diet or an optimal diet to actually experiencing how they feel when they eat that other stuff, And I say to them, oh, what did you have for breakfast when you had a sleepover? They go, oh, they had cereal or Fruit Loops or this or pancakes. And I'm like, oh, how was it? They go, oh, I just had a couple of mouthfuls. I didn't like it. And instead of, and when they say they didn't like it, that's interesting, It's like, okay, well, they're learning. And I grew up on a standard Australian diet and I had cereal every morning and I also suffered ill health. And now I would never go back to that, ever. Yeah. There's just no point. Mate, this has been a great chat. Thank you. I hope the bunny story resonates with any parents out there. And if we could all treat ourselves like our own bunnies. And I've got that book coming out next year. And it was interesting because my publisher had that story and they're going to get children's illustrator to create a children's book. And they came back with an amended version of that. It was just this week. And I was like, yeah, you've missed the point for the story. The story actually is that the children are going to educate the parents. I said, my intention for this children's book is that it's a children's book for the message, because this goes back to how do we change. My intention for this children's book is for children to read it with their parents or by themselves. And I'm aiming it for the 5 to 10 year age bracket, is for the children to read that and for them to treat themselves like their own bunnies and for them then to help their parents on this journey and help teach them. And I think I do think that our children hold the recipe, pardon the pun, but for a better future.
I love that. The bottom up and empowering. I love that you teach them, you give them the choice so that they can make their own decisions too.
Mm-hmm.
That's so great. And do you have to go, or can you get into your future movie idea?
We might have to save that for another one, because my daughters are about to wake up, and I've got touch football with them and dancing, and then I've got to go to work for 12 hours, and I've got to be a dad and get their breakfast ready. So
okay.
We've got.
I can't keep.
But I'd be very happy to come back and talk to you at a later date about the other side of my work and what I'm passionate about. But I think this has been a wonderful conversation, Brian, and I really appreciate the time and the opportunity to share. And it's a hell of a journey, and I congratulate you on all the work that you're doing and your podcast and the movie when it eventually comes out. And congratulations, brother. I love you.
Thank you, and thank you for being such a positive force in this world. I'll have to have you back on again, hopefully later when you have more to share. But you've been such a positive force from everything that I've heard, even just in the past month. So thank you so much.
Cheers, brother. Love you.
What a sweet guy Pete is. Let's continue to spread the love by sharing this podcast and the trailer of Food Lies. Find it on foodlies.org. Support us in these last days on Indiegogo. And please rate and review this podcast. It's really easy on the Apple Podcast app, and it really helps. Thanks so much, and see you next week. We have a really special guest who is on the working group of the World Health Organization in 2015 that decided red meat causes cancer. I'll let you in on a little secret. He was against it. Stay healthy, my friends.